Welcome to the latest episode of The Human Edge. My guest this week is Frank Reeves. Frank is a veteran of the travel tech industry, having co-founded a business, Avvio, 20 or so years ago. He started out life as the chief product officer and after a period of time became the CEO. We had a really interesting conversation today about how tough it is to be the CEO, to be the founder of a startup, of a scale-up, of a growing business. There was a period of time in Avvio's history which was existential. Frank talks about how he got through that, how they got through that as a business, how he got through that with the help of therapy, among other things. And so we talk about the importance of people generally, but especially in the startup world, founders and CEOs, protecting their mental health. He also talks about how therapy, psychotherapy, working with a coach, being able to speak in a safe space helped him strategically, helped him iterate who he needed to be in order to be the CEO to take that business forward. It was a really, really interesting conversation. And today, Frank has started a fund for the travel tech industry called Voyria. It's a £5 million fund looking at investing in really early stage startups in the travel tech industry. So I love the conversation. I hope you do too. As always, if you enjoyed it, please share with everybody you know. Please subscribe. It would be massively helpful. Thank you. If your 18-year-old self was in the room with us today, would he recognize, the man that he's become?
In part, I think yes, and in large part, no. I mean, my 18-year-old self was very, what was I? Sort of rallying against authority a little bit. Back then, I think I was 19 before I got dreadlocks, but at 18 I had, as soon as I finished school, secondary school in Ireland, I had sort of bright red dyed hair, like one of my favorite grunge band singers. I played guitar, I was in multiple bands, long hair, which then turned into dreadlocks. So I was pushing those sort of boundaries, if you like. I was also quite technical. I've been very interested in technology all along. And where I am now, whilst I'm still in the tech ecosystem, I'm no longer a programmer, and I think that'd be a bit of a disappointment to my 18-year-old self. Creativity has come about in other ways, but I think my 18-year-old self would have expected there to be more of a direct link between a creative kind of career and where I've ended up.
Were you always destined to be an entrepreneur, do you think?
I think I was always pushing. I was always sort of challenging. Not necessarily authority all the time, but there was a fair share of that. But I think I was always looking for new ways to do things. I was quite bored in school and in university, and I've got a very kind of ADHD type brain. And I think looking back, I've always sort of struggled to fit in any particular box. I think the fact that I ended up doing something different and sort of taking a leap, multiple leaps, if you like, and kind of learning on the job, I think is I feel a little bit hardwired, in that way. So, whether that's entrepreneurial or, creative or something like that, but I think something out of the norm, quote unquote, out of the day job routine was probably always on the cards.
Does it run in the family? You often find entrepreneurs whose parents were entrepreneurs as well. Was that the case with you?
Not so much from a parent perspective. Growing up in Ireland as I did, and my father, as he did back in the early days, it was very much a function of kind of go get a job, do an apprenticeship and sort of get a stable, permanent, pensionable job. So he's also a very creative thinker, and I think he would love a second chance at something a bit maybe more technical. Every time I visit him in Ireland, there's always some kind of hacking type of question or other, right? How can the Wi-Fi be better? And what if I did this with this? And how can we kind of optimize certain systems? So I think to that extent, yes, chip off the old block, but his career was much more of a, typical kind of male breadwinner career.
Yeah,
Permanent
a product of the times,
yeah,
I
absolutely,
suppose.
absolutely. Yeah, hardworking though, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And so for you, the business that you sold, and we'll come on to all of that, that you sold relatively recently, I think you began, or you came into the business 20 or so years ago.
You're right.
But not as the leader of the business, not
Right.
as the CEO of the business.
Yeah.
Take me through the journey from kind of that point to when you became
Yeah.
the CEO, the leader.
Oh, okay. So I was one of three co-founders of the business. And I was, at the time, working in a computer programming role. So I was sort of in full-time employment in Dublin with a big .com at the time, Sun Microsystems. So when I sort of jumped in with the other two co-founders, I was bringing that sort of product software development skill set, and we were setting up ultimately a software business. So I think it was very clear early on that I would be the programmer, then the chief product officer, chief technology officer, and that was kind of the path, the very organic path that I was on. Over time, obviously, things in the business sort of they change and adapt, and I was always very comfortable kind of in the market, representing the technology or representing the brand and the culture of the business. So I was very comfortable out there, sort of in some cases as the face of the company. And, over time, we had a number of changes. The business was sort of struggling around 2011, 2012. And we knew we needed to make some big changes. And ultimately, it almost needed to be pointed out to me by the shareholders that wouldn't you just sort of take on, like, rather than trying to find someone to come in, wouldn't you just take it on? And I was like, I've never really thought about it. So
and why did you never really thought about it?
Thought about it? I don't know. I could always, I think, it's a bit about kind of purpose and vision, I guess. Starting in the business where I did as a product guy, I had a very clear sense of, purpose and why almost, right? Well, this is my job. Right? I'm representing the technology. We've got to build very innovative tech. We've got to stand out. It's got to work. It's got to really move the needle. And I've got to build the team and ultimately, champion that. And over time, I think I struggled to kind of realize that there were other potential areas of purpose within the business. And I think because I didn't start a business as a CEO, I kind of never really adopted that mindset. So when it came time for us to look at what we were going to do next, I was thinking, well, who can I find to bring in as CEO? And the answer was obvious to the shareholders, but not at all obvious to me.
Because I suppose, just thinking about it, your identity, your self-story was product. I'm the product guy.
Right, exactly. And somewhat in the market. I mean, I was sort of ticking so many boxes, being sort of in the market, on the product, all across the operation and the DNA of the business. I mean, I'd been there since day dot. So, there really wasn't a huge, set of skills that I hadn't developed in some way within the business. So,
And I'm curious about that transition. So, kind of roughly, how big was the business at the time in terms of personnel?
We were, going back then to 2011, I would guess about 40, I would say, yeah. Okay. And we were in big trouble. I mean, we'd had the Irish recession and we'd gone and raised some venture debt, but we had done that very much as a lifestyle company, without any of the discipline and the governance that, really needs to come in around the commitments you're signing up for when you take a big venture debt, when you take any debt. So having bootstrapped the company up to that point, we sort of quickly found that we were not able to really service the debt. And when big bills came due, we found ourselves technically insolvent. So when I did step into the CEO role, it was also very clear what had to be done, or at least attempted, which was refinancing, right, restructuring the business. So again, there was a very clear set of challenges and goals that had to be done on day one.
Yeah,
I think the bigger challenge came after. For me, the bigger challenge as CEO came on the back of that being done. I was like, okay, well, I think the company is safe now, or at least safer. And once we started growing, it was like, okay, great, this could just sort of keep growing, right? I mean, job done. And it took me a long time, I think, about 12 months, I would say, to find another sense of kind of purpose and why around what I wanted to do, what I felt driven to do.
Yeah. So the first purpose, okay, I'm CEO now, I need to save the company.
Exactly.
And when you're in that mode, I imagine it's kind of tunnel vision,
Totally.
not really thinking about anything other than what you absolutely have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And all thoughts of what being a CEO means, they can wait till later.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that how it was for that period of
Yeah,
time?
I mean, very much looking back on it now, it was very clear what had to be done, and it was not an easy thing to do in terms of, we had to kind of kiss a lot of frogs until we met an investor that was brave enough to actually go on the journey with us.
Yeah.
And I think, again, because there were changes within the personnel and the management structure of the business, we were a bit more credible with changes than we would have been without changes. But yeah, I was very fortunate in 2014 to raise money from Calculus Capital here in London. And then I think the 12 months immediately following that was sort of, all hands on deck. We cleared the debt, we brought in the equity, we had to kind of get the company back into shape again. And then it became a bit harder to figure out, well, once that was sort of technically done, what's next, right?
Yeah.
What do we do from here?
And I'm really curious about like the juxtaposition, if I can put it like that, of those two time periods, and what it would have taken for you, kind of mentally, psychologically. It sounded like an incredibly stressful period. It was an existential period of time. I need to save the company, and it's kind of, as CEO, that's on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And you're in the market, as you say, having to kiss a lot of frogs. That must have been, I'm imagining, stressful, exhausting. If you can take yourself back to that time, what was your kind of your thought process? How did you even get through that period of time?
I mean, it was as stark as you're highlighting. We had venture debt that was just, we were being called on, on a monthly basis. We pay the debt. We could barely service the interest, and our debt providers were just calling it in. So it really was a case of, I mean, I think I was never in doubt as to how good a business we had.
Yeah.
We got ourselves into, a really sort of uncomfortable position. But underneath that, I think the fundamentals of the business were strong. We were really good in the market. We really made a difference working within the hotel travel tech space, right? We were very referenceable. The business had been going for probably 12 years. At that time, we had long-standing customers. So I think I always felt that fundamentally we were backable. And it was just about going through, a long, arduous process of finding the investor that would ultimately kind of see that and support us. But it was, I think, there was a lot of psychotherapy. There was a lot of counselling done then and sort of beyond that. But even with all of that, there were certainly a lot of very stressful, sleepless nights.
Yeah, and I can't remember what the stats are, but in the startup world, if we can call startup scale-up world, the instances of founder, CEO, mental health issues and challenges is way higher than in the normal civilian world, if I can put it like that. And it sounds like that's because of the pressures that you're often under. But that was so 2011. That was still like a decade or so ago. These days, people are much more aware of mental health challenges. Was that something that was spoken of, at the time when you were going through all of that?
I think generally probably not. I was in a relationship and went on to marry this incredible psychotherapist.
That definitely helps.
Yeah, that definitely helps. So I think I was very, very kind of open to that world anyway. I had been reading quite a lot. I think not quite as an 18-year-old, but maybe as an early 20-year-old, I was quite into Buddhism and meditation and just mental health and well-being and sort of looking for support in various different ways. I think was something I found myself very open to. And then, within that sort of personal family relationship, it was sort of an open book there as well. I think what I found very useful, both with my then girlfriend, now wife, but also as we built the company out and built the board, and I've had multiple sort of chairmen over the years, I found it very useful to be able to just sort of kind of ideate in real time, right? Just talk, not even to, but sometimes at people.
Yeah.
But in a very open, kind of supportive way, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've just got this, I'm not really asking for help with it,
Yeah.
but I do need an outlet. I need to talk about it. And of course I'm asking for help with things. But really I just need a sort of a supportive sounding, sounding board, kind of safe space, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that and in the work I do as a coach, that's part of the deal. You know, you provide a space in a non-judgmental safe space in which to talk. And I wonder, did that process then, moving on to kind of the 12 months after you'd saved the business, and you're kind of figuring out, well, who, it was almost like another ideation of you. Who am I? Who am I as CEO? Did you use the kind of psychotherapy and those safe spaces to think about who you needed to become?
Yes, I think so. And I think I certainly used those opportunities to work through some of the challenges. You know, every business has challenges. Every day is different. Right?
Yeah.
You're always firefighting, and that no 2 days felt like they were alike. I feel like I definitely used those spaces and opportunities and supports to understand how the business was shaped. And I mentioned ADHD a little earlier. I think I personally sort of thrive with 10 things going on in parallel. And I found myself at one point, but at several points really, looking at the business and well, it's a bit chaotic. I mean, it's like we can't really kind of nail down one particular thing. And I remember a coach at the time highlighting in the form of a question, well, why do you think you've designed the business that way? You know, what is it about your personality, your brain that might actually really enjoy a business like that?
Yeah.
And it's creating problems, you know, left, right, and center, but maybe it's by design. And it's, I think, profound insights in conversations and sort of workshopping ideas like that that, you know, really do help with breaking new ground, so to speak, in terms of, okay, well, what kind of a business do we have really? Where am I helping? Where am I, you know, detracting from what might otherwise be a normal course for the business? And I think when you bootstrap a company, and I'd been, you know, for better or worse, I'd been going for 15, 16 years at this point within the business. So no problem delaying gratification, no problem putting my head down, you know, really fighting and personal sacrifices and all the rest of it. Those were never really in doubt. I think when you then get a business that has turned that corner, and you know the existential crises are sort of somewhat behind you, and you've got a business that's growing, I certainly found that it was not at all clear what I wanted to do with a business like that, both within the business but also personally. You know, I wasn't likely to, you know, if there was an opportunity to cash it in, I wasn't likely to go and buy a car and do all these fancy things, right? So I'd spent so long doing little or none of that, that it then became pretty difficult for me in that CEO role to understand, well, what is, you know, the business has purpose and vision and everything. But me as a CEO with this set of responsibilities, what's my vision and purpose as CEO as opposed to for the business itself?
And what was the answer in the end?
I think it was a few things, but I think there was, you know, ironically, over that many years, there was also an element of needing a change. There was certainly an element of, you know, early shareholders, be they friends and family or early staff that had invested very early on. I felt great obligation to deliver a result for those shareholders, if not for myself, but for other people that were early supporters and part of that journey. Around that time, so 2015, I got married. First son came along at the end of 2016. And I think there was also a developing urgency personally to do something different, right? To sort of not be stuck in, you know, the same business in sort of 5, 6, 10 years time sort of thing. So I think a few things kind of came together.
Sorry, Frank, I want to stop there because that's really interesting. What was it about the thought of being, I don't know if you use the word stuck, but in that business for the next decade that kind of didn't appeal to you?
Again, go back to maybe the way my brain is wired. It was beginning to get quite samey. And whilst it's a roller coaster and you sort of enjoy, or you're maybe biologically programmed to go through all the ups and downs. Once you've done a couple of rounds of funding, you've demystified that, right? You do it the first time and it's amazing. The second time you feel like you've learned a little bit from the first time that is helpful. So thinking, okay, well, I could stick with this business and we could grow it and I could bring more and more people in and we could raise more money and do bigger and bigger rounds. Didn't feel as exciting as doing it the first or maybe the second time did.
Yeah.
We had pushed the business overseas. We were sort of international. You build out the team. The more you knock down, I think, in a sort of a personal journey like that, the less exciting it is to look at, doing that again or something that feels or looks a bit like that again.
So it's something about the necessity to grow, to have, to kind of to challenge yourself, to have kind of experiences. And it sounds like what you're thinking is in the next 10 years, there isn't really the scope for that. So I'm going to need to find something new to challenge myself with.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly felt so. I felt that the business, was sort of flying, certainly in sort of, as we came through COVID. I mean, COVID destroyed the business, but we managed to hang in there. And then once we came through COVID and travel exploded, we were very well positioned. So, in the early post-COVID, it was clear that the business was really on a positive upward trajectory. So it was certainly very viable to go and raise money and continue and grow faster and internationalize quicker. It wasn't at all clear to me that was something that was personally inspirational, right? I think when it came time to look at ultimately what do I want to do next with the business, I felt that there weren't many personal challenges left for me within the business, but also that the life cycle of the business had kind of run a course. Not that there wasn't a sort of future, but I felt that in the area of hotel or travel technology that we were, the story that I saw that the business could tell, right, its journey, I felt like we'd at least had one full cycle of that. So I didn't feel that looking for an exit, either personally or an exit for the business, was premature in that sense.
Okay. And it sounds like we're going to come on to kind of some of the reasons why you wanted to exit the business. But before we do that, I'm still curious about like the question you're asking yourself before, who am I as a CEO once all that firefighting had been put to bed? Who were you? What kind of leader, I suppose is the question, what kind of leader were you?
I guess not somebody that initially, for whatever reason, sought to start a business and lead from the front. I feel like I grew up in the business and sort of I didn't do an MBA. It was very much sort of on the job learning. So I felt what we built within the business was a genuine sort of brand where people, we had values, but we never invested in, the more formalized kind of semi-artificial team building where we doubled down. Our values weren't written on the wall or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we had a very natural kind of culture and people in the business were and are friends with one another. And the business really evolved. I guess we had maybe 20 years all told to do it. So, we evolved in a very organic way in that sense. And then personally, I started waking up thinking that there had to be more than just sort of continuing to grow the business. And there were some aspects of the business as it grew that were not really, that didn't feel so natural to me. So if you take it right back to bootstrapping a business, where it's you versus the world, right? There's nothing to put in there, it's all on the line. And then you go through the ups and downs and the highs and lows and the insolvency bit, you go through that, you go through COVID. We're coming out the other side of that where the business was growing.
Yeah.
And, every cell in your body is sort of wired to reinvest and grow and be bigger and bigger and bigger and, develop more market share. But what the business actually needs is a really kick-ass P&L, where it's not just revenue growth, but it's also strong profitability. That's what the shareholders need, right? That's where the real value creation is when a transaction comes along. And that's not a very natural thing. It wasn't a very natural thing for me to run a business like that, where the profitability should stay as profitability, because 2 or 3 years of that and you've really got a business that's appealing to people. Whereas you kind of, you bootstrap something and you should reinvest it. If we just pumped a couple of million more into product, we would be able to do a few more things. So,
and just pausing there, that feeling of, and you see it everywhere, scaling, bigger. That's not always the right approach. Plenty of companies try that and fail. What is it about maybe the way we're wired as human beings, or maybe it's something to do with the industry that says that we have to be bigger, we have to keep striving for bigger?
I think you kind of, you're destined to go on that journey from the point that you raise investment, right? Because the investment's all about the return on the investment, and therefore the growth is going to be what, the idea, the belief that investor A will be replaced by investor B because investor B also believes that there is an investor C who will replace that. So I think you're very much, once you go beyond the lifestyle company, and that's a super viable approach to a business, is very different. The governance, the kind of things that you take seriously and really need to pay attention to. Once you go beyond that lifestyle stage, I think is really critical. And we found ourselves stuck in between, and we were kind of dying on the vine, stuck in between. But yeah, I think once you do start raising money, and whether you feel a personal sense of duty, because even if you raise from a fund, there are people behind the fund, right? Individuals behind the fund, who are going to write a check on the hope that they might have 10 investment opportunities, but your business is going to be where they're going to place some or all of their chips. They have alternatives. There are alternatives in the market, right? But you do make a promise of sorts to deliver for those people. And I think once you look at the money behind the fund, you realize that, well, this really has to deliver a return. And it's not necessarily a natural way to think about a business when you're starting off, because you're all about like, oh, this way of doing things sucks. I could do it better than that. Or I've seen something that nobody else is seeing. I can build a product, and if I can sell that product, there's just huge satisfaction in, hey, I've done it, I've achieved something. There's success, and there's huge reward in that. And seeing the business sort of evolve and grow is very personally satisfying.
And I think that's why you see there are plenty of founders who, when after they become CEO, realize actually the journey from this point on isn't as exciting to me. It's not as creative. It's entrepreneurial in a completely different way, and so I want to get someone else in to run the business.
I think that does happen quite a bit, right? Startup CEOs or execs, they're great at a certain stage of the business, and then there comes a point where, maybe they stay on, but there certainly comes a point, I think, for a lot of people like that, where it's not obvious that this is really doing it for them anymore. Maybe then it's not also doing it for the shareholders or the execs or the management or the staff. So, I think it's pretty common.
And so you were saying that you've got to a point in time where you had to look at kind of different metrics. It's more around profitability and less around growing. What was that simply with a view to selling the company in 2, 3, 5 years' time?
I wouldn't say it was as clear as a vision to sell the company, but even in raising money, you're selling, the shares of an existing shareholder. So, for example, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, it was like, well, I could sell some of my shares. I still have to raise money. I still have to build a business that is exciting and growing, where people want to buy in. Because whether that's buying the whole company or they buy some shareholders, they're still having to buy equity, right? So I think, it was realizing that the only way the next big change for me personally was going to come was by presenting a business that was not just from a product perspective or from a sales perspective, but that there was a very clear sort of value from an investor's perspective, which, in selling travel technology, and we were selling to a lot of independent hotels, technology for bookings and marketing, and there was no real obvious way to deliver a hockey stick type result in sales. Sales would be gradual.
And a hockey stick meaning kind of upwards.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That inflection point where suddenly that revenue line just takes off.
Yeah.
The DNA of my business and our market was never such that there was an obvious hockey stick opportunity on the revenue side. So I think with a very supportive board and exec team, it was like, well, if there isn't a very natural hockey stick on growth, then the business we have to present as a valuable one is got to be a combination of revenue and profitability. So therefore, we need to build a business that's showing good growth on both revenue and profitability. And that changes the business because you'd always like to pay staff more.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when you start focusing on the profitability that needs to stay in the business, you have a different set of priorities and criteria around ultimately what drives shareholder value. And that isn't necessarily the 10-year plan to launch a new disruptive product. It's more about the next 3 to 5 years of proving you are where you say you are.
Yeah. What role does a company culture fit into this kind of picture that you're painting?
I mean, I've seen different approaches to company culture. For us, again, it was not a sort of prescribed thing. It came about very organically, and I think what we did over time was build a real brand where, we had each other's backs. We were super passionate about what we did. We called BS on one another all the time. But again, these were just things that were, quite organic in the business.
But I want to give you a bit of credit here because these things may have been organic, but stuff like that tends to come from the top. So whether you were doing it consciously or not, it sounded like that was kind of, those values were something that you created.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of, for sure, I was part of it. I certainly didn't kind of rally against it. And again, maybe this is, in a sense, connected to, when I did take on the CEO role, it was just sort of, it's almost like I grew up with my colleagues in the company, then I stepped into the CEO role. It was, we were always very clear on who we were in the market, right? Why we were worth paying attention to, why hotels should buy our stuff, right? Very passionate about what we did, but I think we were just sort of friends, and people came to work, through all the ups and downs, in large part because these are the people that they like spending time with, and when they had other opportunities, many people stayed with us because of reasons like that. But I think for however we got to our culture, and we had a number of years where we were very successful with metrics like Great Place to Work, multiple years in the top 10 of Great Places to Work, which is really neat because you put yourself up against other companies and you go through that audit process. And you come out the other side having a metric, right, or having a set of metrics as to where you are, for better or worse. And those were really kind of enlightening things to do. But having a strong culture, I think there's so much you can do. Like, innovation is downstream of the people. It's the people. At the end of the day, it's all about the people.
Yeah.
And I think you have so many more tools at your disposal when you feel like you're starting from a point of really strong culture. That otherwise, I think, businesses that are not there could struggle with.
Do investors care about their portfolio companies' culture?
I think some would inevitably and some don't. I mean, I think if you're maybe depending on the stage of the investment, right? Some companies, I think some big companies famously have poor culture or have a reputation for poor culture.
Yeah.
Just performance and performance management. And again, that gets you a lot. But I think when you invest in early stage companies, you're looking for teams and leadership and a DNA and obviously a market opportunity, but you're looking to back that for 5, 7, 9 years. So I think in that sense, while you're getting in quite early, you are looking for stuff that is indicative of culture, right? You're looking for DNA. I think if you're coming in at a later stage and you're thinking like a traditional private equity, I'll hold this for 3 years and then I'll flip it to someone else, I think culture is less important.
Yeah.
You're maybe more considering the pure P&L. I mean, of course, culture is important. You don't want to lose all your people and have to start again. But I think you're probably less connected to what's on the ground. But again, it's a later stage company, so I think different investors at different stages probably feel differently about things like that.
One of the reasons I'm asking is because I've always been curious about after you exited to SHR, your title was something like Chief Evangelist.
Right.
And I wondered, what does that mean?
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I was with SHR for close to 18 months. I'm not sure I figured it out. But to go back to one of the things I used to do in Avvio, even prior to being CEO, was because we were an innovative product company, I would often take the opportunity on stage to talk about our tech. And sort of became the de facto brand ambassador. And then as I took over as CEO, your culture ambassador and all the rest. So I think when SHR acquired Avvio in late 22, I'd been discussing with Rodrigo, the CEO of SHR, about how we balance things. What should Rodrigo do? What should I focus on? We were both sort of peers, I guess, similar sized businesses actually. But what I was looking for was more in the market, connect me to the product, brand positioning, telling the world, who we are collectively. So that was something I was very keen to do. And to the extent that had an internal kind of culture, help us figure out who we are, why that matters, why should people care, and how does that impact everyone within the organization? Be the outward representation of that, but also internal. That was exciting, and again, back to culture, that was very engaging 18 months.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I have the word storytelling in my mind, and there are definitely CEOs that tell the story of their businesses better than others. It sounds like that was something, and you're telling the story again here in a really lovely way. So it sounds like it came and still comes naturally to you.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the founder thing as well, right? When you really buy it, when you really sort of believe that you're adding value to the market, that you're better than the comp set. And we were brave as well as a brand. We would measure ourselves against competitors and go out with a guaranteed performance improvement. And again, that was all part of building culture, because it was like we were taking these big, bold steps to kind of put our reputation on the line almost. But it was just very clear, like, here's who we are, here's how that's different, and here's why that matters. And I think once you feel like you've landed on something where you kind of tick all those boxes, then I think you could have picked anybody across the company and they would have taken, a pretty good stab at being the person on stage telling the industry why that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I want to just change tack a little bit. I do want to hear about kind of the exit to SHR and the reasons personally for you, and I suppose, and in business terms. But before we get there, I do want to talk about AI. Now, you developed Allora 2017. Okay, so we're kind of 7 years from that point to where AI is well, it's not the new thing. It's everywhere, but it feels like 2017 AI wouldn't have been talked about anywhere near as much as it is now. Yeah. What was the thought process? How did the innovation process work?
Yeah. So it was closer to 2016 when we started the journey around building Allora. So we were then getting very confused in a crowded market with all of the other booking engines, right? Hotel booking engines. If you're operating a hotel, you probably had 10 different credible booking engines that you could choose from. And we felt that, the industry is it's pretty basic. If you think of hotel bookings as, e-commerce in travel, Amazon had long been doing their recommender engine, right? Like people who like this book or a product also do other things. And, the entertainment brands and YouTube channels, recommender technology was really common. eBay, everybody, right? But search also, your search is also different from mine. So we weren't really taking a very big leap in terms of, well, shouldn't the hotel e-commerce, right? Shouldn't that be personalized? Shouldn't we at least try to give a user, a potential guest on a hotel website, a better user journey, a more relevant user journey than like just a hotel brochure website? Say everybody gets the same thing, and a booking engine plugin that just says book direct, right? Even after you book, right? Just that's what it does. It's just off the shelf brochure and plugin. And again, we had a great board, Calculus Capital, when they came in 2014, and the chairman that came in afterwards were all super supportive. And we just wanted to kind of, again, break that traditional travel e-commerce and personalize it. So we started in 2016, launched allora in 2017. It was then, and arguably still, very new. Most hotels today, even the major chains, don't personalize the travel journey. It's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, the online travel agents do.
Yes.
Expedia, Booking.com, there are
Yes.
tens of these. But, one of the differentiators on those major brand sites is that they will give you a more personalized, meaningful travel experience. So if you go to choose any of them and make a booking and then go back to the website, they're not going to tell you to book the same thing again. They know you've booked it. And it's so trivial, and we expect this. But, try booking a hotel on its own website and then going back the next day. You'll not be remembered. And anyway, we felt that there was an opportunity to deliver the next level of sort of competitive advantage for our hotel customers by moving from traditional plug-and-play e-commerce to personalized, sort of machine learning, where hotels understand their guests more and more through each guest journey.
Yeah.
The launch of allora at the end of late 2017, I think was another brave thing that we did. I mentioned that the culture of the company was brave.
Yes.
And we like trying new things. But I remember the first 12, 18 months, maybe even longer, standing up at a hotel conference talking about why AI was important.
Yes.
And it was, I was certainly not preaching to the converted.
But you persisted, and allora, am I right in saying allora became one of the flagship products that of SHR? Is that?
Yeah. So when we went to the market in 2022 to either raise money or sell the business, you bring in an advisory company and they write a sort of an anonymized teaser.
Right.
Our anonymized teaser said AI booking engine, and the whole world knew who we were because there was only one.
Yes.
So we were definitely valued for our allora technology. So SHR came along. Thankfully, we ran a competitive process, which delivered a great result to shareholders. But SHR won the deal and ultimately acquired Avvio and the allora platform. And the allora platform then has gone on to become the flagship platform for SHR. So a lot of the SHR technology went and got bolted on to allora, helping us to deploy AI and more connected guest journeys across CRM and revenue management and other essential parts of the hotel tech stack. And where we are today, allora.ai is the platform that SHR brings to market.
Going back a step, you talked earlier about one of the considerations for exiting. What were some of the others in terms of your thinking at the time? Should we or should we not? Kind of seek greater investment, or actually exit and let someone else take it from here.
So I think what sort of kicked the process off was our investor, Calculus Capital, in 2014. They typically have a 5 to 7 year hold period. And of course, we had COVID come in, which killed everything, and everyone thought the business would sort of die on the vine, and we were lucky enough to pull through. But, it was very obvious what we were getting into when we brought Calculus in as investors. So there was always going to be a time frame where hopefully Calculus would get a return.
Yeah.
And once the business came through COVID and started to really accelerate, I think it was obvious to everyone that, Calculus have investors and individuals behind that fund that ultimately need to recycle that cash. So we kind of knew what needed to happen. What was less clear was, well, to your point, do I raise money to just replace Calculus with somebody else, or do we ultimately try and find somebody to buy the whole business, somebody strategic, for example? And we went to market with the mandate of a dual process. I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. Do I want to go and raise more money and sort of keep going? I had a sense that I didn't, but I wasn't very sure early on in the process. And as we went through the process, I think I just became, as I really had to think about, well, how am I going to spend 20 million of an additional equity raise? And I just sort of felt like, can I do that? Do I want to do that? Do I, if I'm to be intellectually honest, do I think the business can justify that. And a few things came together that made me think that's probably not the right call. And 18 months down the road from that, I think that was the right call for me personally, but also I think it was the right call for the business, for Avvio, to become part of something bigger rather than to, let's say, raise 20 million and try and become something bigger by itself. I think that would have been a difficult strategy. And 18 months on, I think
it was vindicated. Yeah. And what were those things that came together to show you that actually it was time to move on?
Yeah, I mean, I started thinking of either doing other things or just not doing this. I mean, you know, I started thinking of, well, do I want to take the business on for 5 to 7 years with more investment and more commitments to deliver sort of, you know, growth for those investors? And that's a big decision. Having done multiple sort of raises before that, you know, that comes with a lot of responsibility. Am I authentically hungry enough to do this, and do I think it could be done? And I couldn't answer either of those two clearly enough in a positive way. But what I also felt was that the story of the business, let's say if I fantasize about the scenario where the business gets sold, does that feel like it would be premature? Or does that feel like an okay outcome? Right? Do I feel like I've taken this business and this brand through a natural kind of life cycle? Or might I feel like I'm leaving something undone?
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like I'd be leaving something undone.
It sounds like you felt like you took it as far as you could.
I think so. Yeah. But then, so once I kind of was coming down on that side of the equation, it then becomes about, well, you know, we've got 100 people that have given so much of themselves. I only want to find an outcome where those careers are secured and it's not going to be a part of a massive downsize. So one of the things that made the SHR deal really appealing for me above the sort of the acquisition amount was the synergy between the two organizations, how complementary the technology was on both sides, and the services and the teams. So when we did close the deal with SHR, there was no downsizing across the business. Everybody in my business, Avvio, went on to, you know, in many cases, a bigger role in a more sort of international company.
Yeah,
so, and that felt like a really big part of it.
That thinking and reflects the culture that you were talking about before. You know, everyone has each other's backs, and you as the CEO, you had to have. You didn't have to. You chose to have the back of everybody in the organisation.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you kind of, maybe that comes from a cynical place where you want to sleep comfortably at night and you don't want to feel like you've sort of shafted anyone, or you've sort of sold the company out from under people, and now a whole bunch of people in the short to medium term are going to be looking for work. But for one reason or another, it was very clear that, you know, if we are going to find a buyer for the business, it has to be a buyer that, because again, the business we had at that time was kind of flying. I didn't have to sell, right? I had an investor that was politely saying, hey, this looks like a good time. But, you know, 12 months later would also have been a good time from their perspective. So I didn't feel pressured to take any deal. And that's a great place to be when it comes to selling a business that you've put 20 years into, that you can do it sort of on the right terms for yourself personally and for things that feel important.
Talk to me about the transition then. You'd been CEO for the best part of 20 years. You know, I'm thinking about elite sports people who, footballers, athletes, whoever it is, they kind of dedicate a large part of their lives to being that thing. A lot of their identity is wrapped up in being an athlete. And then once it's over, you hear many of them really, really struggle mentally and in many other ways with that transition, because it's like they've lost their sense of identity. For you, what was that transition like?
Well, it felt, I mean, I don't know how, I feel like I recognize the sport people analogy. It didn't feel like it came prematurely to me. You know, I really felt like this was the outcome that I was also looking for. So I felt in that sense ready. also felt this developing sense of, well, what will I do? I mean, I had 18 months of not being the CEO.
Sure.
And that was sort of a long time. Whilst I was engaged and busy as chief evangelist, it wasn't what I'd spent 20 years doing. You know, it was already sort of an 18-month runway into what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
You know, because I'm not going to do this forever. This is so far from what I was doing. But again, it was almost like a grace period of just sort of settling into the question of, well, what happens when you take all my email away and you take all these, you know, these things that give me this great sense of, you know, ego boost and sort of importance. And I started to feel that I, at least right now, don't want to start another technology company. I don't want to kind of jump back into something that looks or feels anything like what I've done before. But finding a way to sort of play a part across the technology ecosystem and, you know, work with other founders, other entrepreneurs, other travel tech, stay in travel. It's an industry I really love. It's an amazing industry. Staying in that ecosystem, but not with any one particular company, started to feel like a very exciting thing. And I found myself over a period of months just getting more and more and more excited about the idea that, well, maybe there's a future where I can sort of have a career more like that.
Yeah, which brings us to the present day and Voyria.
Voyria, that's right.
Voyria, yeah.
Voyria, yeah. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a plant, right? So
it's a very unusual plant.
It is. Yeah. Tell me about the plant, because that, I think, says something about what you're trying to achieve.
Right. So and I'm not a botanist, I don't have any part of that in my background or anything like that, but I think it's a book that we've both read, actually, Entangled Life.
Yes.
So I read about this plant. So keep in mind that I'm thinking, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the next venture. And I stumbled upon this particular plant described in Entangled Life. And it's a unique species of plant, flowering plant, that has lost its ability, or maybe never had an ability, to photosynthesize. So unlike every other type of flowering plant that can derive energy directly from the sun, Voyria has evolved instead around a unique symbiotic relationship with mushrooms, or mycorrhizal fungi, basically subterranean mushroom network. And it can take what other plants take from photosynthesis from those mycorrhizal fungi, and then it gives stuff back in return. And I thought, well, that's the kind of thing that I want to do in the industry, right? Having raised money and been around sort of the formality of sort of investment deals a few times, you can kind of take money from anyone. But, you know, is it really the best place to take the money from? All things being equal, you know, do you get more than money? Do you get collaboration? Do you get industry expertise? And there are reasons why the answer is mostly no. I mean, big funds talk about what they do to kind of support the portfolio, and of course they're motivated to do that. But I started thinking, well, if I'm going to, you know, ultimately build a fund for early stage travel technology companies, we're going to do more than your average fund. A, because of the expertise and the experience that I have in the industry, but the bits that I don't know, my partners know. And together, if I bring the right partners to this fund, together we'll really be able to move the needle, or help move the needle, for early stage travel tech companies. So that name or concept or brand for what it is we wanted to do felt like, you know, a really nice fit. And yeah, so I launched Voyria as a early stage seed and pre-seed travel tech fund this year.
Who or what are you looking for, or looking to invest in?
So travel tech, I think that's an industry. Maybe 5 years down the line, there'll be, you know, other industries that we'll have maybe multiple funds also focusing on. But right now, I know what I don't know, and I know that I know something in travel tech, and then my partners also know travel tech. So we're looking for early stage, that is seed or pre-seed, travel technology companies. UK and Ireland, but not necessarily UK and Ireland. Since the launch of the fund, I mean, the industry seems to have responded really well, and there's been like some very nice kind of natural PR and profile boost across the industry. Many people saying this is just what the industry needs, like finally a brand that's going to be passionate about the travel vertical.
Yes.
So yeah, we're looking at investments to that stage of company, investments ranging from either 50,000 to 250,000. We're looking to build or deploy a £5 million fund next year. We've got close to 4 million deployed in the market this year. And travel's a very big ecosystem. The kind of companies that are coming to us at the moment could be anything from, in-flight entertainment systems, all the way through, more innovative customer journey and travel, or just areas of the broad travel space that's not really been addressed well. And I think particularly when you think of the opportunity that AI gives around, accelerated competitive advantage, and also just a market that is still ripe for disruption. Like if you watch any of the big, even ChatGPT, when they talk about, what's coming, they always get to travel. They always talk about what's not really, like how long it takes to research travel and then how complex it is to book it and how fragmented and overly complex the distribution landscape is. None of which really serves the guest. And gives operators, I think, a pretty tough time in terms of profitability. So yes, of course, multiple industries will be really impacted by AI, and we're not just looking at AI opportunities within travel, but we probably have, a little bit of a leaning towards some of the more obvious areas of AI disruption in travel.
Yeah, and I can see how certain technologies or products and services, AI, in that sector could be really attractive from the perspective of the type of entrepreneur you're kind of looking to invest in. Do you have a profile of the type of people that you want to work with, kind of how they're wired, how they think, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think if you ask me that in 2-3 years, I'll probably have an answer. I am very new to this. I've not gone to Harvard and done an MBA, right? So I'm not the traditional sort of venture capitalist or private equity person that might have concise answers to things like that. I think
which may mean that you've got a better answer.
Well, it may. I mean, I think certainly the market opportunity, either that is visible to the entrepreneur or that is visible, based on multiple discussions between Voyria and the entrepreneur. You referenced the failure rate in sort of startup stage companies. It's really high. Obviously, it's famously really high. So you're looking for opportunities that can potentially really take off, where the one or two investments will return a 15 to 20 times multiple, and that'll make up for the businesses that for one reason or another didn't quite. So I think it's less about the people and the ideas we're looking for and more about there are businesses that are very clearly not going to fit within that mandate, where, even at the best possible valuation, the problem with valuation is if the valuation is really low and you take too much of the equity, then you're kind of killing the business, right? You're not really, there is no real opportunity for multiple other funding rounds and founders to still have any skin in the game. So you're really trying to find that sweet spot where the valuation is fair, allows for the kind of upsides that seed stage or pre-seed investors are looking for. But again, I think the differentiation is we get travel, and we don't just get it and can spot an opportunity, but we get it and feel like we can really, that knowledge, that expertise, that network can really help to make a difference, and that together we can drive it forward.
Yeah, and I suppose you've got a better chance, or the businesses in which you invest have a better chance of kind of lowering that famously high failure rate because they have a whole ecosystem of support behind them.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the plan. But I think otherwise it's everything across the travel ecosystem. All of the conversations that we've been having, and I'm sort of heading the sort of discovery stage and then bringing deals to the investment committee. But every conversation that I've had, which is maybe up on 25, I would say, since the launch of the fund, maybe even less than a month ago, they're very rewarding conversations because you're talking about an industry that you're passionate about. You're kind of collaborating on whether there's real sort of growth potential. And even where there isn't, I think there's something very rewarding about being able to give guidance, or maybe say, well, why don't you go and talk, or maybe think about it in a different way. Even on the deals that we're not going to invest in, I think it's just those conversations have all been rewarding.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right.
Dwayne, how are we doing for time?
We are 1 hour, 2 minutes.
How about that? Okay, so let me round off the conversation, and I think we're done. And to give you a heads up, because some guests are struggling with the question, which is it's a bit of a gimmick, but I'm going to ask you if you can think about a guest that you would like to see interviewed on this podcast. Who might that be? So that's I'll give you a.
Okay, give me a second.
Yeah. The one caveat is they have to be alive.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Okay. Dwayne, still okay? Okay. Frank, thanks so much for coming in. I've had a really great time talking to you. There's a ton of value in what you've been saying, and for entrepreneurs, for maybe even for VCs listening, hopefully there's plenty of gold in there. But before we end, I have one question that I like to ask at the end of the show, which is, can you think of a guest, they have to be alive, but can you think of a guest that you would love to see me interview for this podcast?
Well, we touched on support and vulnerability, and a lot of that stuff I think is pretty fundamental, right? To whether you're in business or whatever you're thinking about doing. And I'm in my mid-40s, thinking a lot about 2 young children, thinking a lot about life and sort of what decisions and where it's all going to go. I read a series of books by an American psychotherapist, Jungian psychotherapist, called James Hollis.
James Hollis.
James Hollis, Hollis. Never met the man, don't know him. But I've also listened to him do multiple interviews. And he's quite prolific in terms of the number of books he's put out, but they're super accessible, they're super short. And they all deal with, to my mind, the ones that I've read at least, all connect around this idea of finding meaning, right? Finding meaning in your relationships, in your family dynamics, in your business, in your career, in your midlife. And living a more considered life. And I think James Hollis would be an incredible person to do a deep dive with.
Great recommendation. James, if you're watching, we'd love to have you on. Frank, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.